It started at a dinner table I never wanted to sit at. Sunday evening, fading light over hill country, and the old ranch house still smelled like varnish and mothballs. Laura's father kept the thermostat at 72 year-round, the kind of brittle, artificial comfort that makes the silence ring louder when no one's talking. We'd been invited, no summoned, for one of his family nights. That's what he called it. He liked traditions, even if those traditions felt more like a quiet funeral for something no one could name. Laura and I had been married 20 years. Through the hard years, through the lean ones, through our son's birth and his broken arm at 10, through Laura's health scare and my father's funeral. 2 decades of patching holes together, fighting over nothing, reconciling over coffee in the same kitchen where she once kissed me like I mattered. I thought we were solid. Not perfect, but something stronger than time. I was wrong. The house sat just outside Austin, on 2 acres of sun-scorched land where the grass always looked half dead, no matter the season. Her father never hired anyone. Always said, if you can't work the land, you don't deserve to own it. Of course, he never mowed it himself anymore. That was always someone else's job now. Same with the repairs. Same with the labor. That evening, I noticed a contractor's ladder still leaning against the back shed. Fresh caulk on the gutters. He'd been fixing things again with someone else's hands. Laura was already inside when I stepped through the door. Her sister Mandy waved like I was a mailman dropping off a bill. Laura's mother smiled, tight and polite, like always. But the tension in the room had shape. It lived in the corners, in the stiff posture, in the forced greetings. Then Edward turned around. He was standing in the kitchen, glass of white wine in hand, dress shirt open just enough to show the kind of tan you only get from expensive shade. Tall, clean-shaven. That sharp gleam behind his eyes that made you feel like he saw your value as a percentage, not a person. I recognized him instantly, not his face but his type. He crossed the room with a surgeon's precision and shook my hand like he was weighing me. Edward, he said. Mandy's lucky charm. I gave him my name. Just my name. He nodded at my jacket. Vintage. Worn. He smiled. The kind of smile people practice in boardrooms and dating apps. Some people choose simplicity, he said, loud enough for the others to hear. Others just don't get a choice. Laughter broke. First Mandy. Then their mother. Then even Laura, covering her mouth like it slipped out by accident. But the damage was already done. She leaned in, close enough that only I could hear. Stop making the family look bad with that attitude. That's when I shut off. Not with a bang. Just a quiet switch inside me. The kind no one sees flip until it's too late. I poured myself a glass of water. No ice. Just enough to feel like I was holding something solid. Dinner was steak and potatoes. Edward asked for medium rare, then sent it back when it came out too pink. The rest of us sat like extras in a show he had directed. He talked about his startup, some tech thing about risk modeling and predictive analytics. Words that sound smart when you don't look too closely. Basically, he said, swirling his wine, I lead a software development team. Security architecture, code integrity. The backbone stuff. The real foundation. His tone suggested that no one else in the room would understand, but he'd explain anyway, out of kindness. Someone whistled. Mandy beamed. Laura looked at me, not with admiration but comparison. Like, why didn't you ever become someone like this? Like, why are you still in steel-toed boots at your age? I chewed my food slowly, counted the seconds between sips of water. Every now and then someone tried to loop me in. Michael, you work in IT too, right? But it always turned into a redirect back to Edward, who explained everything like he had invented the internet in his garage. No one asked about my latest project. No one cared that I'd kept a Texas firm alive through 3 mergers, that I'd built my career without flash, without fanfare, that I'd paid off our mortgage while others chased glory and debt. Instead, I watched them laugh. Laura, in particular, laughing too freely, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not at home, not around me. She touched Edward's arm once. Briefly. Nothing scandalous, not even flirty. But intentional. She looked alive beside him. And beside me? She looked bored. The meal dragged. Edward talked about his car. A Tesla Model S. Not the plaid one. Not worth the money. He talked about his trips to Napa, his stock options, his deep dives with angel investors. I kept track like it was a ledger. 9 humble brags. For thinly veiled insults. 1 direct shot at me. You still drive that? What was it? A Tacoma? Runs smooth, I said. He nodded. I admire that. Commitment to the classics. More laughter. More wine. I looked around the table at Laura, her father, Mandy, even the kids. They didn't see me anymore. Not really. I was furniture. I was the chair that didn't quite match the others, the one everyone tolerates but never sits in first. I'd become a placeholder in the family I helped hold up. Laura didn't notice I hadn't touched my steak. Didn't ask if I was okay. She used to. Once, years ago, she'd squeeze my hand under the table when things got tense. Not tonight. And that silence, that cold, complicit silence, was worse than any insult Edward could have delivered, because her silence meant she agreed. Or worse, that she didn't think I was worth defending. So I sat there, chewing on dry bread, watching a room full of people celebrate a man they barely knew, while the man who had been paying their bills for 20 years was left to fade into the wallpaper. No outburst. No scene. That's not who I am. I've always been the man who stays, who works quietly, who waits for storms to pass. But something shifted that night. Not a crack. Not yet. Just a small, deep movement in the foundation. Something only I could feel. And that's how it started. Not with a fight, but with a silence so loud it echoed all the way home. We drove home in silence. The kind that hums beneath the skin. Laura looked out the window like the trees might offer her something I couldn't. Her fingers tapped against her knee. She didn't speak. Not once. The lights from the dashboard washed her face in blue, making her look younger. Or maybe just farther away. I watched the road. But my mind was still at that table. The wine glasses. The laughter. Edward's voice. Echoing like a sermon in a church built on sand. I thought I could let it go. I'd done it before, swallowed things too heavy to name, smiled through teeth that ground themselves to dust. But this was different. There was something final about that night. Not in what was said, but in what wasn't. No one defended me. No one pulled Edward aside. Laura didn't meet my eyes once after her whisper. That whisper, stop making the family look bad. Cut cleaner than any insult he'd flung across the table. Because it wasn't his job to defend me. It was hers. She knew what I'd given up. Knew the hours, the nights I stayed up running back-end audits for clients who barely knew my name. Knew the years I'd spent paying her sister's debts in silence. Writing checks to cover what their father wouldn't admit he'd lost in his business years ago. She knew. And she laughed anyway. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside her. The distance between us suddenly vast. Her breath was steady, soft, easy, like nothing had changed, like she hadn't helped humiliate the man who kept the ground from falling out beneath her family's feet. I got up around 3 a.m., sat at the kitchen table, opened my phone, scrolled through my work folders, and that's when I remembered. A month earlier, I'd received a support ticket from a man named Edward P. Linton. Same voice. Same overconfident tone. He was calling in a panic. He couldn't log in to his corporate work system. Locked out. Locked himself out, actually. Password resets failed. Multi-factor denied. The kicker? His password, the one he admitted to, live on the recorded call, was 123456. No numbers. No symbols. No thought. I remember listening to that call the first time and shaking my head. Rookie mistake. But I'd forgotten about it after resolving the ticket. Until that night, I replayed it, listened to it again. Not for revenge. Not yet. But because it proved something I needed to feel in my bones. He was hollow. A mask. A man who sold confidence, not substance. And everyone at that table had fallen for it. I didn't decide anything that night. I just sat there, listening to him fumble over the line, begging the support tech not to report the lapse. Please, he said, don't escalate this. It'll get flagged in compliance. His voice cracked with fear. The man who built architecture. The man Laura admired. Reduced to a child begging not to be caught. In the morning I made coffee. Left early. Didn't say goodbye. By the time Saturday rolled around, the next family dinner was already in motion. This time it was at Mandy's place. Some modern, glass-heavy duplex near downtown. Still smelling like new paint and debt. Laura insisted we go. It'll be more relaxed, she said. Less pressure. Her tone was casual, but I saw the way she checked her reflection twice before we left. How she changed earrings at the last minute. Edward was there before us. Again. Always early, always standing like the host even when he wasn't. This time he brought a small Bluetooth speaker. Played jazz like he was curating the mood. When we walked in, he grinned. Glad you made it, Mike. Mike. No one calls me that but my brother. But I let it pass. Dinner was tapas. Tiny portions served on wide plates. It felt performative. Edward passed around some imported red. Explained the tannins like we'd asked. The room fell into rhythm again, his rhythm. His tempo. His voice led every conversation, and everyone followed. Until he mentioned work. Nothing complicated, he said. Just leading DevOps. I oversee security structure, code integrity, the boring but critical stuff. Without us, your data's just public domain. He grinned like he was proud of the metaphor. Everyone laughed again. Even Laura. Even her father. And that's when I took out my phone. Set it on the table. Opened the playback file from the support archive. Hit play. Edward's voice filled the room. Hi, yes, I locked myself out. I tried resetting, but, it says my account's been flagged. Murmurs. Confusion. I let it keep going. I didn't think the password was a risk. I've used it before. It was 123456. I didn't realize. Mandy blinked. Wait. Is that you? Edward froze. Fork halfway to his mouth. His face pale. Wine untouched. His charm dissolved in an instant. He opened his mouth, but I paused the recording before he could speak. Slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked at him. Calm. Not angry. Just tired. You run security architecture, right? He didn't answer. Laura's face turned to ash. Her father stared at the table. Mandy looked at Edward like he'd kicked her dog. Someone chuckled. Nervously. One of the kids. No one else did. Edward pushed back from the table. That's a violation. How did you even? You used a public support line, I said. Recording was internal. Anonymous. I took a bite of my food. Finally. The silence hung like smoke. Edward left early. Laura didn't speak the whole way home. No accusations. No questions. Just silence. But not the silence of rage. The silence of embarrassment. The silence of a woman who had staked her admiration on a man who folded under pressure. Who had laughed at her own husband while elevating someone too fragile to protect his own login credentials. And me? I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumph. Because what happened at that table wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Revelation for her. For Mandy. For everyone who had forgotten what quiet competence looks like. What real strength sounds like when it doesn't need a spotlight. But it didn't feel good. It felt empty. Because when your wife laughs at your expense, you don't win by proving her wrong. You just finally understand how far you've already lost. Laura didn't speak to me after that dinner. Not during the drive. Not when we got home. Not even when I slid off my boots at the door like I'd always done. For 20 straight years. She walked straight to the bedroom. Didn't wait for me. Didn't turn around. She moved like a woman retracing her steps in a house she no longer recognized. I heard her pull back the sheets. I stayed on the couch. She didn't call me, and I didn't go to her. That night, the house was filled with a strange kind of noise. The sound of withheld words, of slammed doors avoided at the last second. I sat in the kitchen under the weak light over the sink. The hum of the refrigerator louder than anything either of us had said in hours. I wasn't angry. I was past that. What I felt was quieter. More dangerous. Clarity. That kind of cold, surgical clarity you don't come back from. It was never about Edward. Not really. It wasn't even about the insult or the dinner or the recording. It was the look in her eyes when he spoke. The way she tilted toward him like sunlight. And the way she shrank from me. Not with cruelty. With shame. Like she had decided somewhere along the years that I'd become less than she deserved. Less than she wanted. A man to respect behind closed doors, maybe, but not in public. Not beside her father. Not beside Edward. That truth settled like concrete in my chest. So the next morning I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't wait for explanations. I got dressed. Made my own coffee. Sat at my desk and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Clients from my early contracting days. Old names. Companies I'd helped before they became names in trade journals. People who still owed me favors, or remembered who had once saved their asses in the 11th hour. I updated my resume that morning. Stripped it of modesty. Every contract, every integration, every critical system I'd held together with late nights and duct tape code. I didn't care if it sounded arrogant. I wasn't hiding anymore. By noon, I had 3 interviews lined up. Consulting work. High-end stuff. One in New Mexico, one remote, one I'd almost taken 5 years ago but turned down because Laura didn't want to move. This time, I didn't ask her opinion. I accepted the New Mexico offer a week later. 6-month logistics contract. Double what I made now. Travel optional. They didn't care where I lived, as long as the systems ran smooth and the deadlines were met. I packed my bags on a Sunday afternoon. Didn't say much. Just told Laura I had a contract. She blinked. New Mexico? I nodded. For how long? 6 months. Maybe longer. She stood in the doorway like she was calculating something, measuring how much she could say without sounding like she cared too much. We have a house, she said finally. I shrugged. And I'll keep paying my half. She stared at me for a moment, but not with worry, not with love, with confusion, as if she had expected a fight, or a plea, or some attempt at reconciliation. Instead, I gave her what she'd given me. Silence. The first week in New Mexico felt like stepping into a different body. I woke early, drank bitter motel coffee, sat in rented conference rooms and rebuilt back-end systems like I was laying bricks with my bare hands. I didn't miss home. I didn't even call. The quiet was clean, uncluttered, my own. When I signed the lease on a small apartment outside Santa Fe, the landlord asked if anyone would be joining me. I said no, just me. Laura sent a text that night. Let me know if you need anything from the house. I stared at the screen. Typed, I've got what I need. Didn't press send. Deleted it. Typed again, no. I'm good. Sent that one. She didn't reply. 3 days later, Abby called. Our daughter, a teen now, off at school. She hadn't been at either dinner. She always had a good sense for skipping the messy ones. Mom said you moved out? Her voice cracked at the edges. I took a contract. Are you and Mom okay? I let the question hang, then answered the way only truth can. We're not anything right now. She didn't ask what happened. She never did. Abby's the kind of girl who hears the words under what people say. You coming back? I don't know. Silence. Then she asked, Are you mad at Mom? And I told her the truth. No. I've just learned who she is, and who I am. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't be going back. Not to the house. Not to the dinners. Not to the space I used to call home, filled with people who smiled at strangers louder than they stood beside their own. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. Not the dramatic kind. Not like a man who throws off chains and yells in the street. Just quiet, deliberate liberation. No more proving my worth to people who had already priced me out of their admiration. No more earning loyalty with late nights and overtime pay. No more sitting at tables where my silence was expected and my presence ignored. I didn't cut ties. I just stopped holding the rope. The calls stopped after a while. Laura sent one last message a few weeks in. Edward's out of the picture. Mandy broke it off. I read it twice. Didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because it didn't matter. She thought that was the problem. that his presence had poisoned the well. But the truth is simpler. She had left me long before that night. Inch by inch, smile by smile, laugh by laugh. That dinner didn't break us. It revealed what had already collapsed. A month later, Laura tried to talk. She didn't call. She showed up. Knocked on the apartment door like she didn't know if I'd answer. I almost didn't, but I did. She stood there in a jacket too light for the New Mexico wind, her hands tucked into her sleeves. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just been standing farther back these days. I opened the door and said nothing. She didn't ask to come in. Just stood there on the threshold. Like she wanted to be let in but knew she hadn't earned it. "Edward's gone," she said. No hello. No preamble. I nodded. "I heard." She paused. Looked down at her shoes. He wasn't who I thought. I waited. Silence has a way of working like a mirror. You let someone speak into it, and eventually they see themselves. Laura looked back up. Her face tired. Drawn. No makeup. No mask. "I laughed," she said. "At you. With him. I knew it was wrong. But I did it anyway." There it was. Not the full apology, but the start of something close to truth. She stepped forward, just enough for the air between us to shift. "I didn't mean to humiliate you." I raised an eyebrow. "You just didn't care if I was humiliated." She winced. I stepped aside. Let her in. Not out of warmth, not out of weakness. Just out of curiosity. I wanted to hear the story she'd finally come to tell. She sat on the edge of the couch. I stayed standing. "I miss you," she said, voice cracking. "This place, it's cold. The house. Abby's away, and I can't sleep. The bed feels empty." "You miss the man who kept the lights on," I said. "Not the man you left alone at your father's table." "That's not fair." "It's exactly fair." I let the words land like bricks. "For 20 years," I said. "I stayed. I worked. Paid. I endured. I carried your father's silence, your sister's problems, your shame. I showed up when it mattered, and when it didn't, I built something solid. You wanted something shiny." She blinked hard, tears rising. "I didn't mean to replace you." "You didn't need to," I said. "You just needed to treat me like I was replaceable." She looked at the floor, wiped her eyes. "I thought you'd always be there." That made me laugh. Not loud, not cruel, just sharp. "That's the problem. You thought I was a fixture, not a man. Something reliable, not something real." She stood, crossed the room. "I want to fix this." "You don't get to want that now." She reached for my hand. I stepped back. "You didn't believe in me, Laura. Not when it counted. Not when other people were watching. And that's the only time it matters." Her shoulders collapsed. She sank back onto the couch. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I see that now." But I'd stopped needing her to see. That was the difference. I didn't come to New Mexico to run. I came here to remember who I was before the quiet grind of marriage wore the edges off my dignity. Before I became a man who accepted disrespect as the price of keeping peace. She asked me, "Do you hate me?" "No." The word came easily, because it was true. "I don't hate you. I just stopped making excuses for you." She nodded like she understood. But she didn't. Not really. Not the way she would have if she'd stood up that night. Not the way she would have if she'd put her hand on mine instead of laughing with the man who mocked me in front of our family. The next morning, she left. No fight. No breakdown. Just a quiet goodbye. She kissed my cheek, and I let her. But I didn't kiss back. That was the last time I saw her in person. We spoke again months later. Emails. A few calls. We agreed on what to keep, what to sell. Abby would stay with her during school breaks. I didn't fight that. Abby was still young enough to need softness, and Laura could give that. What I gave, boundaries, stability, would still be there, even from a distance. Abby called more often after that. She never asked about her mother, just about me, how I was doing, if I liked the new city, if I was seeing anyone. I told her the truth. "I'm learning how to be alone again, and not hate it." She understood. That girl always understood. One night, she asked, "Do you still love Mom?" I thought for a long time before answering. "I loved who I thought she was," I said. "But that version of her is gone." She was quiet on the line. Then she said, "You sound like yourself again." That meant more than anything. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't shame Laura in front of others. I didn't call her family and explain what she had done, what she had allowed. I didn't need to, because truth, when spoken without bitterness, has a weight of its own. And when Edward showed himself, when Laura failed to defend me, when silence was louder than any apology, the truth spoke. It said, "You stayed too long in a room where your worth was forgotten." It said, "You were never asking for love. You were asking for recognition, for presence, for loyalty." It said, "You gave too much and asked for too little." So I gave myself the one thing no one else had offered, the freedom to walk away. Now I live in a quiet town. The days are simple. I work with my hands again. I build systems that last. I speak when needed. I laugh when I mean it. And when people look at me, they see a man, not a placeholder. Sometimes Laura texts, small things, a memory, a joke, a question. I reply when I want to, and not out of duty. One day, Abby told me, "Mom's dating again." I smiled. "I hope he's good to her." "You really mean that?" "I do," I said. "But more than that, I hope she's good to him." Because that was the lesson I had to learn the hard way. Kindness is not currency. It's not something you trade for loyalty. If it isn't returned freely, it becomes a debt. And debt poisons love. Laura mistook endurance for weakness. She mistook reliability for irrelevance. She thought because I didn't raise my voice, I didn't have one. But I do. I always did. I just chose not to use it. Until now. So here's my voice. Here's my truth. Not bitter. Not cruel. Just final. If you don't stand beside the one who builds the home, don't be surprised when he leaves and takes the foundation with him. If you laugh with the man who mocks him, don't cry when that man disappears and the one you mocked no longer answers your door. If you look at the person who carried your burdens and say, "You make the family look bad," then don't be shocked when he walks away and leaves you holding the mirror, because respect isn't something you owe to greatness. It's something you owe to consistency, to the one who showed up, to the one who stayed, to the one who built the life you stood in and forgot to thank. So I ask you, was I wrong? Was I cruel? Was I selfish to stop giving where nothing was returned? Or was that the first time I loved myself enough to walk away? Would you have endured it? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you, like me, have finally chosen truth over appearances and found peace in the aftermath? You tell me, because I'm done telling others who I am. Now I just live it.